twists and turns tonight in the search for 5-year-old Michigan girl Nevaeh Buchanan. As the search for the missing child enters its second week, investigators are shifting their attention away from two persons of interest who are both convicted sex offenders and friends of little Nevaeh's mom. 48-year-old Roy Smith currently in custody on suspicion that he violated his parole by allegedly having contact with little Nevaeh. Smith owns a van, listen carefully, which the other person of interest, George Kennedy, once drove. Now, Kennedy is the alleged ex-boyfriend of the missing girl's mom, but he has an alibi, and investigators are now saying, this just in, blood found on a knife in the van that he drove and on sheets in Kennedy's motel room are not a match to little Nevaeh. So the focus of the investigation seems to have gone elsewhere. Then, just yesterday, investigators announced a third person of interest.
This person of interest was dropped off at his residence. 5 minutes later, he's out and back burning items. That raises red flags.
Sure it does, but then, in a startling twist just today, when that man you're looking at, James Easter, was arraigned on unrelated arson charges, the judge revealed, guess what? He is no longer a person of interest. Apparently, they have ruled him out. Now, cops are after a fourth person of interest, the mystery driver of a green minivan. That van was seen parked at the playground right across from little Nevaeh's apartment complex. It appears count them, two school-age boys questioned by cops this weekend may have provided vital information about this mystery man with a van. Meanwhile, Nevaeh's paternal grandmother is speaking out. You will not believe who she suspects knows a whole lot more than they're saying. All the latest in this really bizarre case. But first to my fantastic expert panel. Tom Ruskin, former NYPD police detective, investigator, and president of CMP Protective and Investigative Group. Drew Finling, criminal defense attorney. Bradford Cohen, criminal defense attorney. Mark Eiglarsh, former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney. And we're delighted to have Michelle Sagona, national correspondent for America's Most Wanted. Michelle, you are tracking this case closely. What is the very latest?
The very latest at this point is, just as you mentioned, there are two boys who may have come forward and that investigators are looking for more information from them. In addition, as you did mention, the knife that was found in the possession of Mr. Kennedy, who allegedly had a relationship with Nevaeh's mom, the blood on that knife did come back not belonging to anyone that they knew. So that's actually a good sign that may still mean that this little girl is still alive, and that is something that we still need to look forward to at this point, because there are many success stories within missing person cases.
Mark Eiglarsh, good news and bad news in the sense it's wonderful news that the blood doesn't match little Nevaeh. That gives us hope that she may be alive. But by the same token, with all these persons of interest basically not panning out, it almost feels like this investigation is back to square one, despite something like 500 tips and hundreds upon hundreds of people searching for this child.
Oh, that's correct, but don't despair. Next week we'll have another few persons of interest. I mean, do you find it a little unusual that every week we have our hopes up, yet someone else, no, not so fast? Jane, listen, it's great because it gives us time to talk about things, but what you're doing in the process is, number one, you're helping the future defense lawyer come up with people to blame. Number two, you're really giving a bad name to people who've had nothing to do with it. And third, I think you're compromising the investigation. It's great for Jane Velez-Mitchell's show, but it's bad, I think, bad policy for law enforcement.
Well, I agree that it's such a tough road to decide how much to say, Rebecca Rose Woodland, as a law enforcement agency. Sometimes it seems they don't say enough, and that leads to a lot of speculation, and then sometimes they say too much, and here we have all these persons of interest. Now some of them have alibis, now some of them, it seems, had nothing to do with this, and their name's been splattered all over the national news for days.
Jane, what I'd like to say is this. Law enforcement is following every single lead that they have. These two kids could bring forth 2 or 3 or 4 more leads, which the police will follow up on. And the police are holding this investigation very close to their vest. They're not releasing very much information other than the things that they have to release. This person's of interest, this person isn't of interest, and that will lead to, hopefully, finding this little girl and finding the person who kidnapped her.
Why did we have to know? Wait, why did we have to know the last 2 suspects who had nothing to do with it? Why did we have to know that? And can't you see how that compromises the investigation?
I'm not disagreeing that as a law enforcement person, I wouldn't want that out there. But the fact of the matter is, we live in a media now that's 24/7, and that's going to get out. People do leak. Cops leak portions of their investigation, sometimes purposely. I don't see the reason that these 2 people had to be leaked, but it didn't hurt things.
You know, Jane, let me make one comment. On this show before involving some other cases, you have expressed frustration, as have your callers, about why it's taken so long for forensic tests to come back that would either point to somebody or show somebody didn't do it. It is amazing, as we think about those other cases, that George Kennedy's multi-use tool, we got the blood test back so fast, comparing that to some of the other cases that we've talked about.
Right, and I give kudos to law enforcement for getting that job done quickly. As you just mentioned, blood found in George Kennedy's motel room determined not to match little Nevaeh Buchanan's DNA. Kennedy is a convicted sex offender and reportedly one-time boyfriend of the missing child's mother, now said to be just a friend. This is what the mom said when she heard that the blood in Kennedy's motel room was not a match to her missing child.
It is a very good thing that, you know, the blood that was found in his room is not hers. And I'm not going to stop believing that she is not alive. Because always in the bottom of my heart, I did not whatsoever feel like he had anything to do with it.
Brad Cohen, this mom has been harshly criticized for allowing 2 convicted sex offenders into her child's life. But now the focus seems to be turning away from both Kennedy and Roy Smith. Should the cops come out and say, hey, these guys are no longer persons of interest, we are looking for someone else, so that these 2, whatever they may have done in the past, can go on with their lives?
Well, I'm sure they're not going to make a statement like that, because just in case something comes back, something links them to something, it's really troublesome to say, listen, these guys have absolutely nothing to do with it, unless they have a rock-solid alibi, and absolutely they do have nothing to do with it. Obviously, she's been criticized because, as a parent, you really don't want to be dating a sex offender when you have a young girl in your house. It's probably not the smartest thing to do. And not only was she dating one, allegedly, but then she was befriending other ones. So she was kind of like a magnet for sex offenders. Not a good idea, but certainly not the reason why this happened to her. And so far as all the evidence that comes back doesn't link anything to these 2 guys. So they should make a statement sooner or later that says, hey, these guys can go on with their lives, but not right now. Not until they completely eliminate them.
Now, in a startling revelation, Nevaeh's paternal grandmother spoke out this weekend. This is a shocker. Listen to this.
Jennifer, if you know anything, you know, please come on. This has been long enough. We need Nevaeh home.
Mark, that is a thinly veiled accusation that Nevaeh's own mom, Jennifer, knows something about this child's disappearance.
Well, that's one inference that can be made. I have no idea. I can tell you that those last 2 faces that we just saw, again, we're looking at these people, and police, according to Brad Cohen, he's probably right, they're not going to come out and say, these guys have nothing to do with it. So we'll keep looking at their faces, and maybe down the road it'll just fizzle. But people are going to forever remember that they're associated with this case.
Yeah, but part of the reason is because they are convicted sex offenders, and maybe that's the price that you pay down the road for that kind of history. Everybody, more analysis in just a moment. Who is the man with the green van? 1-877-JVN says. That's 1-877-586-7297. Sound off.